Timberwolf is the colloquial name for a species of canine native to southern Canada and the Great Lakes regions. For tens of thousands of years, timberwolves existed peacefully in their tight-knit packs, eating vulnerable animals and snacking on berries. They and humans were mutually afraid of one another and generally kept their distance. These wolves equally tended to distance themselves from rival packs, prioritizing members of their own. You'd have to imagine that this protocol might have had to have been suspended when they were encountered with an existential threat to their survival. As Europeans arrived, bringing livestock with them, they provoked a rivalry with these ancient beasts. The wolves began to feed on European livestock, and the Europeans responded forcefully. Terminating only recently in the 20th century, a fierce eradication campaign began against the timberwolf. Wolf baiting came to describe the practice of luring and trapping a wolf with poisoned carrion, making the creatures unknowingly administer their own euthanasia. This practice became a sport, and bounties were placed on the wolves' heads. Now imagine you were a wolf during this time. Roaming dim woods, danger could be anywhere. An edible dinner or a poisoned supper. A berry I can eat or a bullet I cannot. If you were a wolf at the time, all you would really have was your intuition, telling you what to do only by a so-called gut feeling. Clearly, the spirit of the intrepid timberwolf would resonate with some. But faced with danger all around, the 2024-25 Minnesota Timberwolves took some time to gel. Prowling in the woods one cold December night, the Wolves met the Hawks.
Anthony Edwards. And it's poked away by Garrison Matthews. Edwards. Intercepted by Nance.
Spread that offense a little bit more with Gobert off the floor. Another turnover there by Edwards.
95-92 Hawks.
Anthony Edwards played 32 minutes in this game, scored 16 points, and turned the ball over 5 times. He would be tremendous in the weeks following this game, but every so often you'd get a wart, an underperformance that critics use to rehash the same old lines. Anthony Edwards is nothing more than a prototypical scoring guard. He lacks versatility, technique, nuance, and IQ. He coasts off natural talent and is perennially lazy, arrogant, and out of shape. How did we get here? Anthony Edwards is not a prototypical scoring guard. He doesn't approach the game with a robotic, predetermined process that's doomed to underperforming when encountered with an exotic defensive look. Anthony Edwards operates based on intuition. Anthony Edwards approaches the game dynamically, adapting his approach to every discrete situation. Anthony Edwards simply flows, but a lot of people don't understand this. A lot of people want to put Anthony Edwards into a box because he's hard to understand. Indeed, the only way to understand a man of intuition is to see where his intuition has taken him. For Edwards' critics, every mistake is a story. So, let's take a look. Through a successful first 2 years in the league with multiple eye-opening performances to show for it, Edwards was rising going into his first postseason appearance, but he wasn't yet the driver of the ship. Karl Anthony Towns had been one of the most talented offensive bigs the league had ever seen in the years preceding this date. Unfortunately for Cat, the closer you get to the mountaintop, the bigger the target on your back becomes, and the Clippers would be determined to attack Towns' well-documented Achilles heel. He bullied guards and blew past centers who left the basket undefended, but bigger wings like Nicholas Batum could absorb Cat's blows, keep up with him, and challenge his exposed handle. Cat was strong and remarkably explosive for his size, but he was slow laterally, so outplaying a defender like Batum meant he simply had to channel all of his force to plow right through, lowering his head and shoulders, which made him oblivious to help defense. And the cherry on top was that because he wasn't being guarded by the opposing team's center, Ivica Zubac. Zubac could protect the rim should Cat manage to get there. The strategy was uniquely suited to trumping the 2022 Timberwolves because Jared Vanderbilt, though an indispensable aspect of their defensive scheme, was a complete offensive non-factor and wouldn't punish the Clippers at all for putting a center on him. Hence, the balance of this game would rely on Anthony Edwards and D'Angelo Russell to simply make things happen. And so, we jump in at the 11:39 mark of the first quarter, where Ant sets the tone with this drive, showcasing his great first step off of the hang dribble and that incredible leaping ability on the finish. The next time down, Towns is stymied by Batum on the ball and Zubac's at the rim. Back to Ant the Rock goes, where coach Chris Finch deploys him in this blind pig action to spring downhill. But notice how Reggie Jackson chooses to go under the screen, reinforcing the backline support. This represents one of the Clippers' two guiding principles in defending Edwards. One, he likes threes, and he can sky above the rim for finishes. So make him shoot mid-ranges, load up the paint to make his layups as hard as possible, and offer him the shot he likes least. And here he hits it, but notice a few things. Edwards' jump shot is two motions, and he gets a lot of lift above the ground. This gives him additional separation, but makes his jumper inconsistent, especially without having any sort of great balance. With Edwards handling above the break, the second aspect of the Clippers' strategy, Ant's left hand. Marcus Morris can't stay in front of him, but Ant himself can't really go to his left, and stumbles into the light gap help for a turnover. So on the next possession, flanked by the suboptimal rolling talent of Jared Vanderbilt, Morris attaches himself to Edwards' right hip, again forcing him to make a play with his left hand, and we see more discomfort than inability. Every second of this loose dribble is a second more that Ant gets paranoid about any one of these defenders coming and taking the ball. So he gathers way early, and Zoo has no trouble timing it up. Here, with Zubac's on him on the outside, he doesn't even attempt to drive towards his left hand, and kicks it over to D'Lo for a contested triple. With neither Ant nor Cat able to produce, the Wolves' offense got off to a paltry start. Ant would go to the bench, and check back in during the second quarter. At the 8:36 mark, he finds himself on an island with Isaiah Hartenstein. Basketball is a game of beats. Go too early and you lose the opportunity to read your defender's leverage and make the appropriate counter. Go too late and the defense constricts, taking away counters. Controlling tempo is supremely important and almost always a matter of intuition. There's no hard and fast rule, you just have to know when to go. So Ant sizes Hartenstein up. The big man plays it solidly at first, then drops back and opens his hips. He tried to bait Ant into a drive, but the patient Edwards held firm. As Ant strings the possession along, he gets into his defender's head, whose jittery feet are anticipating a drive. Still, he can't drag it along too much because the help defenders are bleeding in. This tween cross into a hang dribble is a versatile option because he can shoot or drive off of it. But here, at last, Ant gathers and puts it up. The next defender Ant has to beat is Norman Powell, who goes hard over the screen with Covington as a safety net. Conventional wisdom, if you're double teamed, pass the ball. But there isn't an obvious pass Ant could make here that would actually give his team an advantage. Instead, he uses Powell's momentum against him. Decelerating into this stop, Powell thinks Ant has crossed back, and an open three is the result. If your intuition is weak, you fall back on rules. These are reliable and time-tested, but lack nuance. If you have a strong feel for the game, you can approach each possession as a discrete event, and adapt your process based on what the defense shows you. Without necessarily having a numbers advantage here, many might choose to slow the possession down and turn it into a half-court play. But the sharp and speedy Edwards can realize that the layup opportunity in semi-transition here is just as good as any other shot the Wolves could generate. And forcefully playing earlier in the clock is better for a multitude of reasons. For one, there's far less improv involved, so it's easier to get into rhythm with a repeatable shot you've taken in practice hundreds of times. But for another, dragging possessions out renders teammates flat-footed, which can subconsciously chip away at their focus and rhythm. Early clock offense just keeps everyone way more involved, and can be overwhelming for defenses to deal with. Again, Norman Powell would like to dance, with his intuitive handle, and involves this hang dribble, which can double as a behind-the-back dribble. On the first instant that Powell commits, Ant is off, into a wonky-looking shot. His legs flare out and are probably too widely set. The shot is not even close. Thanks to D'Angelo Russell, the Wolves were riding high through the first half, but as D'Lo cooled down, it was Ant's turn, exploding downhill and riding his intuition, failing to account for the rim protection help of Zubac's. Next time Ant gets an opportunity to initiate, get inside, see the help prematurely, find the open shooter. Now, Ant's deceleration is not that good yet, and because of this, the kickout pass is late. Refining his decel is a long-term goal, but what's important here is that Edwards learned from his mistake. Rather than charging into the same help that formerly hindered him, Edwards identified it early and made the right-ish play. With an adaptive, free-flowing process, making the same conceptual mistake multiple times over is far less common because you see each possession for only what it is. So this time, Ant sees the help, and he also sees that the strong side corner isn't occupied. Usually this would transpose into a weak side corner skip pass, but Vanderbilt relaxes in the short corner for strictly offensive rebounding purposes. Going through his progressions, Ant settles on this midi, which is, needless to say, a work in progress. Then the Clippers started to settle in. George, Morris, Powell. Some role players got in on it too. All of a sudden, it was a 10-point deficit, and Ant, we need you back in here. Hustle plays are another important aspect of Ant's game. They're simple, but they go a long way. Of course, this adaptive playstyle of Edwards couldn't be without elite reaction time and reflexes. So as soon as Ant notices this alley, he barrels inside, and the lead is chipped down to one possession. And again.
Edwards takes it in on Jackson, collides with Powell. Rebound Reed.
Up one, the Clippers go to Paul George in the mid-post.
A two by George. A rebound by
And then D'Lo comes back down the other end.
Russell for the lead.
The Clippers miss. Now it's Ant's turn, and watch what happens here. McDaniel sets a ghost screen, and look at how Jackson and Powell, in a miscommunication, backpedal in rhythm, each trying to catch Ant's drive. Two-possession game. Finally, the Wolves' backcourt would finish the job. A triumphant first appearance on the big stage, and a useful summary of the Edwards we begin with. He's an uber athlete with an especially great first step and explosive vertical leap, but he could work on his body control and deceleration. He's also strong, particularly in his upper body. That said, his handle is pretty average, and his jumper is a work in progress. Good from outside the arc, but still pretty bad inside of it. Is that not a pretty prototypical scoring guard? What sets Anthony Edwards apart? Anthony Edwards reads the game dynamically. He plays on intuition, with unteachable timing and reflexes, but his technique also allows him to dominate the tempo of the game. Hang dribbles are a useful tool because they are so versatile, and with a hang dribble game anchoring his ball handling, he rarely wastes movements when beating his defender downhill. Because of his ability to rage downhill at will and at his own pace, Ant forces the defense's hand in additional attention, which could create opportunities for his teammates. And these aren't just kickouts, but zones. His ability to read zones on the fly will thus be a long-term point of improvement. For their efforts, the Wolves earned a spot in the playoffs, where they'd face the second-seeded Memphis Grizzlies. This was an impressive team, highlighted by their explosive superstar Ja Morant, but underpinned by their remarkable defense led by Jaren Jackson Jr. It would be an uphill battle, so Ant and the Wolves got to climbing. For this game, the Grizzlies would not create a defense skewed to countering Towns, because they had a plan for Edwards instead. Observe how Desmond Bane goes over the screen, with Ja at the nail and Steven Adams in this deep drop. In this coverage, Bane is taking away the three and Adams the rim. Now, the opportunity cost of such a coverage was that you could no longer hard counter Towns, and he had a dominant night in response. But this coverage is ideal for Ant, the Grizzlies thought, who would be lured into either a premature pass or a mid-range, which he wasn't good at, right? Well, with his wonky mechanics and all, Ant hits his first shot. Next time, same play, same results. Now is a good time to ask, what makes Ant a bad mid-range shooter? To me, the answer comes down to balance. Because of Ant's weak shot mechanics, already off-balance middies against pick-and-roll coverage or tight defense became impossibly difficult. When he couldn't get his feet set and square to the basket, the results were sporadic, but usually pretty bad. On a shot like this, because of the deep drop, Ant was able to get his legs underneath him, square to the basket, and the result was a comfortable stroke. So the next time the Wolves ran it, the Grizzlies decided to play it differently. Desmond Bane went to the bench, so Dylan Brooks is guarding Edwards, and his first strategic decision is to lock Ant's right side, forcing him left. Next, Adam steps up much higher in the drop, and Ant's space is constricted. He could take a midi here, but it would be off balance and isn't a natural shot to him. He could also try to push towards the rim, but a weak left hand makes this a perilous endeavor. With these primary reads taken away, Ant slows down and reads the floor. Again, a hang dribble is useful because it gets the defense guessing while he decides what to do. Pushing towards the baseline, Ant sucks in the defense and kicks it to Cat.
Here is Towns. Yes.
On this one, Brooks might be in range to block Edwards' pull-up 3 attempt, so he hits the pocket pass to Towns. Ant is not traditionally considered good at these passes, in the sense that he'd hit them whenever they are available and the best decision. However, this overly simplistic labeling implies that Ant can't make these passes at all, which isn't true. Because of Ant's ability to adapt to any given situation, passes like these are intuitive to him. As always, Ant's isolation work was highly effective, patiently sizing his defender up, inducing shifts in their leverage, and attacking as soon as a window opened up. The Wolves would not win this series, but the message was clear. The laughingstock of the league, a laughingstock no more. They were higher up the mountain, and a lot of it was thanks to their tantalizing young star. His technique isn't there yet, no doubt about it. I mean, he doesn't have a left hand or a mid-range jumper, or is a great passer, or even a great defender for that matter. What's different about Anthony Edwards? Slowing the game down, reading his defender and defenses with sharp reactions, with intuition. He simply played on instinct, not on dogma. Ant was climbing. What he was already good at was unteachable. What he struggled in, easily fixable. Rising is rewarding. You're elated when you climb up onto a new plateau. Peering over the ledge, you can observe your accomplishment in its full glory. But rising is demotivating. When you mount the ledge and roll over onto your back in exhaustion and look up, you begin to realize how high up the mountain really goes. Nikola Jokic was the back-to-back MVP of the league. Next year, he'd have his team back. Worse than seeing an insurmountable cliff is seeing somebody else on top of it. It was clear the Nuggets would be a contender in the West, and the Wolves would have to act decisively to be in front of them. It would be now or never. It would decide everything. It would be crucial.
I'll be popping bottles, sparkles and champagne.
Rudy Gobert is enigmatic. Most people seem to understand that he's a good player, and a lot of people can't stand that fact. If you've never watched Rudy Gobert play, I'd liken it to the following thought experiment. Picture somebody who's been standing in the bitter cold for 30 minutes without gloves, and imagine dragging them inside, putting a pen in their hands, and asking them to draw a perfect circle. There's an indescribable uneasiness watching Gobert play, an uneasiness that was now Edwards' problem. Ant already didn't have any real chemistry with Karl Anthony Towns, one of the most talented offensive bigs in the league. How would he manage chemistry with Gobert? At the same time, the Wolves needed Gobert. If they had wished to continue rostering so many defensive liabilities, including Ant himself, then they needed him out there, and Ant simply had to deal with it. How on earth would this work? Screening is something Anthony Edwards hasn't really had that much of. Cat could do it, but preferred not to. At the same time, Ant's isolations were effective, but he wasn't wired to get teammates involved out of them. All of it meant that this younger Edwards didn't have the structure to assume a primary offensive load, scoring and playmaking. That would all change when the Wolves gave Ant Rudy Gobert, who couldn't catch. He couldn't dribble. He couldn't shoot or pass, but what Gobert could do was lay a big, fat, powerful ball screen and usher Edwards into his primary ball handler era. With screens, Edwards could find easier rhythmic looks, but more importantly, when defenses began to take away his easy rhythmic looks, playmaking opportunities opened up. To get to the top of the mountain, it was simply required to bring a few souls up with you. There's only so high you can get if you're just a scorer, and Ant had showed playmaking promise, but not at volume. Now this would begin to change. So Ant and his crew were ready to catch the Joker, slow his ascent, and use his harness to aid theirs. But before that could be done, they had some business to take care of.
Here in Los Angeles, our crew chief is David Guthrie in his 18th season. Our referee is Tyler Ford in his 8th. And Trey Maddox is the umpire.
The 2023 Wolves were a mess. Injuries, chemistry, stagnation. Many blamed Ant himself for seemingly not improving enough. Despite it all, they actually had a winning record against teams 500 and above. Coming into the 2023 postseason, they were the league's ultimate wildcard. Detractors celebrated when they lost to the Lakers in the first play-in game, due in no small part to Edwards' own underperformance. In their next game, the celebrations would be cut short. But immediately, Ant would have to learn this OKC defense. On this first play, Ant gets inside, but he doesn't see the backline help and gets swallowed up. If Ant's reactions are so good, then why does this keep happening? Well, in this Thunder defense, a lot of help is disguised or comes late, which compromises Ant's ability to react on time. But if the rotation comes earlier, Ant has a way easier time reading it. The name of Ant's game is tempo, so a defender out-timing him will give him trouble. That said, there is something to be said about Ant's ability to read defenses on the individual level versus on the team level. He's a master at decoding his defender's leverage and exploiting it, and has shown ample ability to punish help defenders who place themselves in his driving lane. All of it comes back to Ant's playstyle, free-flowing, adaptive, and intuitive. Ant reads what's in front of him as it's happening. If the entire defense, however, is tilted towards stopping him, then not everything he needs to see will actually be right in front of him. That said, when the help is there, he can dissect it intuitively. So here's a screen and roll possession with Gobert, who gives him an awesome ball screen, eliminating Dort and engaging Isaiah Joe. Jordan McLaughlin cuts in to smartly set this down screen, and Kyle Anderson gets a wide open shot out of Ant's pick and roll. Watch here how Ant phases through the gap help, and again, because the low man comes over early, Ant knows that the corner is open. This OKC team also offered a host of talented on-ball defenders for Ant to attempt to outplay. While before Ant had to soften his defender to shift their leverage, this new Ant could drive with smaller cracks in the opposing defender's stance. One way Ant could do this was by going around them. Driving angles are something many players struggle with, but Ants have been highly polished for a while now, and this might have been out of sheer necessity. Trying to bulldoze through with his still weak left hand just wasn't viable, so Edwards cruises around J-Dub for the score. Thanks to Ant and his teammates, the Wolves again emerged from the play-in tournament, this time as the 8th seed, and at last, it was time for the main event. To guard Edwards, the Nuggets' plan was to stay in drop coverage with the on-ball defender going over the screen to take away the pull-up 3 from Edwards. From there, the Nuggets hoped that Ant would take low percentage mid-range jumpers, and this coverage was very similar to the one the Grizzlies ran the previous year. As for Edwards, the mid-range would pretty much always be there, but he almost never wanted to take them, so more possession by possession decision making. Jokic is in a shallower drop here, for example, which compromises the low man who has to split the rim and the corner shooter, so more dynamic analysis from Edwards. Noticing MPJ appear in his line of sight, he instantly fires the kick out to the corner. Ideally, Ant's actions are defended with the on-ball defender staying in the play to bother Edwards' drive, which can subsequently be sealed away by Jokic, like KCP manages to do here. But before working himself into a hard spot, Ant resets the play. With the nail defender cheating over, this is an advantage for Conley to work with him. When Ant doesn't use the ball screen, the Nuggets opt not to bring too much help towards him, counting on Edwards to shoot himself out of a cannon from the perimeter, unable to decelerate into a comfortable finishing angle. According to the Nuggets, this would frequently result in early gathers or simply not generating enough lift to finish through the trees. This strategy laid out advantages and disadvantages for both sides. Ant would be, by design, given more space to work and have to deal with less direct help. That said, he'd be coaxed into bad decisions more frequently than he'd like. But Anthony Edwards is not a prototypical scoring guard, and every possession is different for him. So let's just see what happens.
Most efficient offense in the NBA. Meanwhile, Anthony Edwards.
You got it. Comes right back on the attack. I've never seen Napola this tired. He seems to be a little winded here early.
Mid-range Edwards. Edwards on the other side. Trying to bank it down. No. Gobert.
Game 1 was going alright until it wasn't. On to Game 2, where Michael Malone adds a wrinkle to the coverage, showing Edwards a double team. Murray takes away the roll, MPJ zones the shooters up, and it's a trivial read. This double team wouldn't be the default coverage, but Ant would have to deal with the coverage being mixed up from time to time. Once again, let's let the rest of Game 2 play.
Wow. Looking sharp right now. And great activity. Here comes Noel backdoor. Just get anything from Karl Anthony Towns. They're in business. Here he is. Gordon has to quickly fire. Misses on the baseline, and they come up empty again. And Denver's offense has got stone cold. This is Edwards. Transition three, and he buries it. 4-point game. 4.5 left in the third. Look at Edwards. Edwards gets a Towns pick. Here he comes. Off balance. Hang. Banks it in. My goodness. That's his third personal. Edwards, as we cross the 7-minute mark, spinning, hanging, puts it in.
Despite a heroic effort from Edwards, the Wolves couldn't take home court advantage, and in Game 3, against coverage, Ant would once again see sturdy backlines, which he could either fall victim to or exploit with passing.
Michael Malone shared as Alexander Walker buries the corner. Murray talks about that all the time. When Murray's at his best, it's not just the scoring, it's filling up the stat sheet. As Edwards just...
Game 3 too would be lost, but in Game 4, owing to a solid overall performance, the Wolves mustered a winning effort. Game 5 would be another do-or-die affair. One way to counter the double team on the high ball screen that we'd seen earlier would be to throw a pocket pass, but this wasn't optimal with Gobert, and Ant doesn't help him here with a badly placed ball. So throughout this entire series, including this game, Ant was very averse to passing the ball to Gobert on the short roll, and this would wound up to arguably have been a handicap, because Gobert needed to be the one to set the initial ball screen. It just couldn't be Cat, who wouldn't set one hard enough. And this tendency encouraged Ant to read the floor, but in that time the advantage would reset, and you might get a possession like this one. But all of that was water under the bridge. Ant was highly successful versus this Nuggets defense, but could occasionally be outdone by his own speed. In Game 5, he couldn't pull any punches, so he worked to fix this. On this drive, Ant decelerates early, and riding contact gets the floater to go. Against the drop, it was the same plottiness. This slow step allowed him to draw the contact early, which cleared the way for the finish. And with this slower approach, Ant was working himself into more intermediate range shots, which could of course be a mixed bag. With this tough layup, Edwards knotted the score at 102. 2 possessions later, and the score would again be tied. And then, Jokic put it away. The Wolves wanted more from 2023. Ant certainly wouldn't be solely to blame for their underperformance, but I don't think he considered himself blameless. He'd enter the following season with a new fire and a new number, and he'd perform like a completely new player. From studying the Wolves-Nuggets playoff series in 2023, a point of curiosity emerges. Namely, if Edwards was so effective against this Nuggets defense, then why did the Wolves, as a team, struggle to produce a competent offense? Was there something underlying about Edwards' game that was working towards the Nuggets' favor? While Edwards was certainly not perfect throughout this series, he was undoubtedly excellent, and there's no evidence to support his playstyle in any way being toxic for the Timberwolves. Rather, I think the problem was that Edwards didn't have the ball enough in this series. In 2023, Anthony Edwards was still only in his 3rd season, and the Wolves were still very much an offense by committee, splitting their reps generally evenly between Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, and Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert pick and rolls. Going into 2024, the balance would shift tremendously towards number 5. These new-look Wolves were amazing on defense, but Ant was still pushing new frontiers. Before, an issue with Ant had been his ability to read defenses on the team level. Now, we begin to notice him consciously making more reads involving ancillary defenders in his peripheral vision, like punishing a low-man rotation from Royce O'Neal here. And he could always do this, but it was throughout this series that it became a fixture of his playstyle, as defenses schemed to take away his scoring with these massively committal coverages involving premature rotations. Anthony Edwards is not a prototypical scoring guard, after all. Few prototypical scoring guards are good enough for this much attention. Fewer still can actually punish the defense for showing it. Because Ant is so good at reading the game dynamically, he was always capable of outplaying these novel coverages. Intuition is a sensitive thing. Gut feelings have a mythical, unchallengeable aura, but they aren't always actually correct. Playing on gut feelings can only take you so far. At some point, you simply need to understand the theory and engage with the literature. And when Ant did, he learned to anticipate defenders that he couldn't necessarily see. A younger version of Edwards would probably kick this one off to Cat and play within his field of vision. This newer Ant was more patient, and he was more cognizant of the fact that the defense he saw was on the scale of the entire team and every player on it. Thus, he probes to find the correct read. This clip is similar. You see the gap defenders hounding him, and what are the odds that a younger version of Edwards just didn't want to deal with this? Instead, he retains his dribble, probably looking to get the ball to Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and he doesn't succeed, but the fact that Ant understands how he's being guarded is massively important, and removes the quote-unquote surprise factor advantage that a novel defensive look has by default. Here again, Ant draws an aggressive coverage, and yet again, Ant reads the correct defender and makes the correct play. But reading the game wasn't the only thing Ant got better at. By this point, it's clear that the largest flaw in his otherwise spotless athletic profile was his ability to decelerate and change speeds. In Game 5 against the Nuggets, we saw him consciously implement a slower pace to outplay the defense. This year, Ant would continue to be more patient and deliberative, and it was this patience that allowed Ant to unlock a more comfortable full-court game, playing early in the clock by commencing his attack from the back court. Watch how his speed undulates in this full-court possession. Slow, fast, and slow again to decelerate into the and one. Having more speeds meant that Ant was more threatening, because a standstill no longer necessarily meant that he'd be gathering into a shot, so defenders in front of him were simply more jittery and easier to punish. Look at how he has KD on skates here. If you sat on the standstill, you'd be blown by, and his decel and footwork, though more functional than ever, still weren't perfect. But it was both of these improvements, his change of pace and court mapping, that made Ant newly suited to operation from the free throw line area. No, he still wasn't a good mid-range shooter, but he was viable in this play type, where he could be drawing a lot of defensive attention that would be exploited for simple kickouts. And so, a sweep. A sweet, easy sweep and a hungry pack of wolves. Who's next? The Nuggets would return to their drop coverage that lined up prophylactic weak side defenders at the rim, which would continue to dare Ant into mid-range jumpers. Through 3 games, the effectiveness of this was questionable because on top of his established ability to punish backpedaling bigs, which had been elaborated on by his improved deceleration, Ant could now make pull-up middies. At least he'd been doing so up until this point in the postseason. But when the Nuggets tried to shove Ant into other situations, it didn't really work out for them because, as we've established by now, Ant interprets the game on a possession-to-possession basis and is motivated by quick reactions. So a gimmicky coverage like this Jokic hedge was really no trouble for Edwards to blow by. Ant's prowess in the middle of the floor was highly troubling for the Nuggets. Not only was he prolific operating the ordinary high pick and roll, but he could also do so against layers of help from the gaps, timing up his gathers. As such, the Nuggets would also try to make Ant play towards the sidelines, but this didn't work because of Edwards' aforementioned amazing driving angles. Ant held a tremendous amount of natural advantages against this Nuggets defense, but that didn't stop them from dealing the Timberwolves a devastating loss in Game 3. What had happened was not necessarily an underperformance from Edwards. He wasn't amazing, but he also wasn't that bad. Rather, him, and by extension Towns, were not given the amount of touches that they really should have had, and their touches were later in the clock than they should have been, all thanks to a ball denial effort from the Nuggets perimeter defenders. In their place, Mike Conley, Alexander Walker, Kyle Anderson, and Naz Reid failed to produce offense, and the Timberwolves sputtered while their defense was equally shoddy. Going forward, the Timberwolves would allow Edwards to bring the ball up the floor more often, so that the Nuggets could not deny him the ball in the half court. But the Wolves were still playing from behind for the majority of Game 4. Edwards was good, but his teammates failed to step up to the occasion, and bad coaching decisions only compounded the harm. At the 3:47 mark of the first quarter, the Wolves held a 2-point lead before checking Rudy Gobert out. When Gobert checked back in the second quarter, they were down by 15 points. Gobert's screening and defense were vital for the Timberwolves, who sputtered on both ends as Rudy went to the bench. At the end of the first half, Ant would drill a 3 to cut the lead to 7. And then...
Edwards. Lost the ball with a turnover. Nice Denver D. Porter at the other end. And he tries and he gets it to go. Beating the clock. Court length. That's intercepted. Murray good at the goal. Got it! A big time three. Jokic with the screen. And a try ball. Murray's got 9. Sets up and double. 18 points. Here comes Murray. He's got 11. Launches a three.
In devastating fashion, this game would slip away. The Nuggets had an 18-point lead by the 9:16 mark of the third quarter. From there, despite Ant's best efforts, the Wolves couldn't close the gap. After starting the postseason a resounding 6-0, they had dropped 2 straight at home, and were headed into Game 5 in Denver. They simply could not lose this. Going into this game, anything felt possible. The Nuggets had the best player in the world, and to many, were the best team in the world. The Wolves seemingly had their number regardless. What struck many was that despite what the win-loss record might have indicated, Ant played really well against these Nuggets over the last 2 postseasons, and we've seen all the reasons why this is. Simply put, Denver didn't have enough talent to defend Ant's pick and rolls. Jokic was a sitting duck in coverage that Ant took it to time and again. Attempts to insulate Jokic were exposed by the resourceful Edwards, who has a gift at reading the game in real time. Would the Nuggets be comfortable letting Ant dictate Game 7? If they had a coverage that could stop Ant outright, surely they would have used it by now. If I can't play and drop, can't hedge, can't switch, zones don't work, what do I do? Nothing? Yes, nothing. Nothing was the answer. The Nuggets were past the point where they were comfortable letting this man distribute the punishment. In Game 7, somebody, anybody else, would have to. Finally, the Nuggets double-teamed Ant outright. And immediately it worked. Putting the ball in rotation, the Wolves were exposed for not having players who could sternly punish the advantage. This pass finds its way inside to Gobert, who can't finish over the wing Michael Porter Jr. Obviously, this zealous strategy would create open Wolves threes. At this point, after 11 games against Ant over the last 2 postseasons, the Nuggets were willing to accept it. But Ant wouldn't go out without a fight. He realizes what's going on and tries to exploit lapses whenever they happen. In characteristic fashion, he reads the help defender on this play, realizing that Murray is ready to double team him, and goes to the opposite side. But that left hand never really became super strong. Here, the double is late, so Ant can get inside, but then he has to wrestle through all of these bodies, and the Wolves just couldn't hit anything. Going into period 2, the Wolves had only posted a paltry 19 points. Immediately, they're pushed into a late clock situation. Ant sees yet another double, and it's a shot clock violation. Almost 3 minutes in, another double and empty possession.
Popped up from his seat with his injury and said, we have to play through the physicality. They feel
and at this point, Ant is completely out of rhythm, missing shots, and the Wolves' offense is bleeding. So Edwards would need to sit down for a couple of minutes. He wasn't done yet. His bag of tricks wasn't empty. He just needed a moment to refresh himself. Down 14, Ant perfectly splits the double to get to the rim. Cat would go on to score 5 points in quick succession to cut the lead to 10. The Wolves pivoted to running less action through Ant down the stretch of the first half, and results were mixed. Jokic and Murray would run the deficit up to 15 to end it. It was looking bleak. It was time for Cat to step up, and he did. It was time for the defense to tense up even more, and it did. It was time for the Wolves to play Wolves basketball, and they did.
Conley's got 3 points, 1 of 7. Towns laces one inside to Gobert. Coming in as the 3 seed. Denver is the 2 and a defending champion. Driving is Edwards, kicking it. It's a 3. Goes Murray, knocked away inside Gobert. Believing Edwards with his speed is gone. 29. Jokic has 14 and 17. Edwards through traffic. The 3 is in. 16 points. Towns aggressively into Brown, trudging down the lane. Finals for the first time since Kevin Garnett back in 2004. with the Timberwolves.
They're going to send the double Ant-Man.
Edwards, it's a three. Good! Minnesota's biggest lead is 7. It's stolen by Conley. He pickpockets Murray. He gets it off to Reed. Corner, Edwards, aim, shoots, score! Timeout!
Miraculously, the Wolves did it. Overcoming a 20-point deficit on the road in Game 7, the Wolves ousted the defending champions. It was a dramatic series that saw each of their crucial players have ups and downs. It was a statement. It should have been cause for a celebration. But unfortunately, toppling one opponent only meant provoking another, and the Western Conference Finals didn't go according to plan. Ant got his revenge the following season, but that too would be short-lived. Still, Edwards' remarkable playoff runs over the last 2 seasons with Minnesota has asserted him on the short list of the best players the league has to offer. But a lot of people just don't like this. Anthony Edwards is not a prototypical scoring guard, but a lot of people want him to be. Summarizing ineffable concepts of feel and intuition into a neat category is difficult. A lot of Ant's detractors acknowledge that he is extremely talented, maybe in unique ways, but don't know how to properly articulate their specific observations, so they often simply don't consider them in their assessment of him as a player at all. For instance, it's impossible not to notice Ant's killer instinct as a player. This video only sampled 10 postseason games, but Edwards has countless more in both the regular season and playoffs. Games where he unilaterally takes over, dominates, and single-handedly wins it for his team. A lot of people recognize that this happens, but few people realize that these aren't flukes, or a matter of luck, or some other cliche that doesn't have a real basis in the on-court product. This is a very real phenomenon, and the reason that Ant is so comfortable taking over games is precisely because of his intuitive, fluid process, making him largely impervious to alternating defensive schemes, because he assesses every possession on an individual basis, owing to his sharp reactions and intuitive skills. Players who don't possess this instinct frequently fall victim to simple adjustments. In order to stop Edwards, massive, large-scale defensive schemes like the one we saw in Game 7 must be put into place. The trivial adjustments that teams make throughout the course of a game have no trouble being outdone by Anthony Edwards and simply won't slow him down. So he can have entire games where he's unstoppable. This isn't a cliche, it's a foundational aspect of Ant's craft. What makes Ant a quote-unquote playoff riser? Among NBA fans, there appears to be a growing sentiment that playoff rising or dropping aren't actually real things, and that a player's performance in the postseason is entirely a function of chance and circumstance. But I'd argue that Edwards is naturally given to high productivity in the postseason, because his default process is inherently postseason proof, for much the same reasons that he's able to take games over so effortlessly. Playoff droppers usually have rigid, predetermined playstyles that could be iced out with diligent scouting and a well-implemented scheme. But Ant isn't like this. His ability to diagnose defensive coverages on the fly makes him largely impervious to the unique defensive schemes deployed in the postseason, because every coverage has weaknesses, and unlike the many players who fall short in the postseason because they can't exploit and understand these weaknesses before the damage is done and the defense can preemptively readjust, Ant can understand and defeat the defensive scheme in real time. Next, low assist and mid-range numbers suggest that Ant is a bad passer and bad mid-range shooter. While his struggles as an inside-the-arc scorer are not to be ignored and certainly have much room for improvement, the idea that he's inept inside the arc is simply not true. When playing off of contact, Ant is able to develop a stable base, which removes a significant amount of variance from his mid-range shots. Because of his blazing speed and non-elite deceleration, he often doesn't create the best balance on his rim finishes or running mid-ranges. But when he's forced to play bully ball, Ant has no problems converting inside the arc. His bigger problems as an inside-the-arc scorer can probably be boiled down to inconsistent rim finishing, the lack of a floater game, and not drawing as many fouls as he probably should. And all of these have to do with deceleration and balance and body control, which are Ant's key areas for improvement going forward. Is Ant a bad passer? I'm sure by now you'd agree that the discourse around this topic is very simplistic and lacks a lot of nuance that we've seen in this video. Ant will never be a pass-first facilitating point guard. He is a score-first player by nature and will always choose getting a bucket over passing if both options are equal. But if rotations are obvious and right in front of him, And if the defense is uniquely suited to take away Ant's scoring, he will look to move the ball and facilitate. He will look to involve his teammates, and he will pass when it's the best decision.
I don't look at it like I struggled or he struggled. They had a good game plan, making us get off the ball. Especially for me, man, it was super in the gaps. I made the right play all night, so I don't really look at it like I struggled. I didn't get enough shots to say I struggled, so that might be how you guys look at it. But yeah, I didn't struggle at all. It's just I made the right play.
Anthony Edwards is not selfish. Even though he loves scoring, he's certainly not an inept playmaker, and his playmaking weaknesses don't boil down to an absolute inability to pass the ball like many have claimed. But alas, regardless of any of this, of any of Ant's postseason performances or regular season successes, for Ant's detractors, every mistake is a story. It doesn't matter how much Ant does. The conversation is always going to be about what he doesn't do. Every underperformance, a parade of pernicious proclamations about how Anthony Edwards is seemingly prototypical. But you know what? I've gotta say, if this is the new prototype, then I think the league is in great hands.